This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions shared are mine and my guests alone and don't represent our employers, past, present, or future. Medicine is always evolving and practices may vary. Nothing here should be taken as medical advice. Always follow your own professional judgment and institutional guidelines.
I think the big difference between being a paramedic and a nurse, and I think this will help answer that question, is being a medic, you're really focused on that acute care, right? That's what our education is really based upon. It's skills heavy, acute care, emergency medicine. When you go through nursing school, you go for everything from the preventative to the acute, subacute, to long term. There's every component that they want you to learn. So I think that understanding that you're no longer in just an emergency setting, that was a big eye opener for me. And I knew that was coming and I appreciated that difference, but I don't think I really fully took that in until I was going through the process.
Welcome to the Beyond the Call Light podcast with Gary, the ER nurse, where we tackle the tough topics in nursing. Update your whiteboards and huddle up because this episode begins now.
Welcome to Beyond the Call Light. I'm your host, Gary Cope, and today joining us is John Smith. Yes, that is his real name, John Smith. He's paramedic to RN and host of Last Known Vitals podcast, which you can find on pretty much any podcasting platform. John, thank you very much for joining me today. I apologize in advance. You are my very first recorded guest. I don't know when this one will air, but you're the first person to come on and agree to be on my podcast. So thank you very much for being my guinea pig.
Well, Gary, I really appreciate you having me, man. And I feel honored,
Well, I've learned a lot about this whole podcasting process. I've watched yours. I'm really impressed with your setup and how you conducted your interview. So I'm very grateful that you've shared some of that knowledge and some of the lessons that you've learned. And that being said, I want to get right into this because you're the reason I'm here. I want to interview people and share their stories to help those out there that might be taking similar journeys and paths in their lives. So first of all, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so like I said, my name really is John Smith. I got into EMS back in 2009. I was swinging a hammer before that, and then the housing crash kind of occurred. And a good friend of mine was working on an ambulance, and I wasn't really doing a whole lot. And he said, "Hey, man, I really think you'd like this." So I went and did a ride along, and sure enough, as we all know, the claws dug right in, and I fell in love. And I got my EMT certification. I ended up getting my EMT intermediate. I began volunteering for a service here in New Hampshire. Every week I would drive around 45 minutes to, volunteer for a 24-hour shift just to get some experience under my belt. And eventually I finally got that paid job and did that for a little while. Yeah, that was a really big moment.
Getting paid always helps.
Yeah, for sure. And, and then eventually I ended up going to paramedic school. From there, I was really fortunate enough to work for a hospital-based service. That's really where I learned how to become a paramedic. After that, I, as many do, was starting to get a little crispy. And I needed a change of scenery. So I found myself in the emergency room where I currently still work.
Now, you recently became a registered nurse. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just finished here in May.
Okay. And how has that transition been going from almost 15 years pre-hospital to stepping into that hospital role as an RN versus being a hospital role as a paramedic?
Yeah, so the learning curve was pretty steep. And what was nice for me is when I first entered into the ER, we were not taking any nursing assignments or anything like that. I kind of call it a bit of a glorified tech, if you will. We were able to do the IVs. Our patient assessments are still very much there and we were part of that team, but, medications, things like that. But we were not in a nursing role specifically. However, about 3 years ago, give or take now, the hospital created this program where it allowed paramedics to begin taking a nursing assignment. They did it right. I have to give a lot of credit to this.
That's impressive.
They started us off slow, level 4, 5 ESI, thing like that. And then they slowly started progressing us. And we're pretty much up to the point now where, the paramedics are taking the 4-patient assignment right up to like the traumas, your cardiac arrest, things like that. Like we're not doing those. But we were managing, NSTEMIs, we were managing, stroke patients, things like that. So it really allowed me the opportunity to kind of start playing as a nurse before I even began nursing school. So that transition then was very steep, and I'll be the first to admit it. That was exhausting, and it still is. I still feel like the imposter even after doing it for a few years now.
I think the first thing that jumps in my mind when you talk about that is like when you're pre-hospital, obviously the acuity that you're talking about paramedics dealing with in the emergency department is nothing they're not accustomed to in the field. However, in the field, it's typically one to one. You've got one patient. And in the hospital, that's a whole new ball game. So how did you find that added workload and the acuity level of having multiple patients?
So that personally is probably my biggest struggle, even still to this day, is understanding how to manage multiple patients in various stages of acuity all at once. And in nursing school, they really preach prioritization. And I think people don't realize how important that aspect is. And when I finally got to that point, I really relied on my preceptor, my colleagues, things like that. And I had a few people that I really looked up to. And I found that that was super important to try to mimic and mirror their approach to this. And I'm the first to ask questions when I don't know something. And every day I would ask for feedback from people again that I respected and be like, hey, how could I have done this better? And they wouldn't hold back. They would tell me, yeah, no, you missed this, this, and this. So I think by putting myself out there and really trying to learn this new role and understanding that it's very different than being that one-to-one in the street, and then coming in and learning how to manage, that for patient, you have that patient that comes in with the cardiac stuff. You have maybe a psychiatric patient, maybe you have a memory care patient all at the same time. And so learning how to prioritize that and cluster my care, right? Those were the big things for me in understanding that approach. It was, like I said, it was a big learning curve, and I still struggle with it today.
And I've been at this for almost 10 years now, and I think that is one of the things whenever I would orient a new nurse, and we had some like flight nurses who were leaving flight, coming to work in the emergency department. And I remember I was orienting one of them, and it was somebody that I had worked with previously in EMS. And I remember thinking, like, why am I orienting this person? Like this person is like their skill levels are so far beyond what I can do. They don't need me to orient them on how to manage their patient load. And at which point I was talking to another flight nurse friend of mine and kind of sharing my concerns, like, how am I supposed to orient this person who has higher skills? He said, listen, they're used to one patient at a time. You're going to give them four. And sometimes those four are all going to be super sick. They're not used to that. So yes, they absolutely need orienting. And so when I hear you talk about that, it reminds me of the challenges that I faced trying to orient somebody that was coming from that one-to-one pre-hospital, experience. So now the question I think that naturally comes next is you were doing paramedic work in the emergency department, taking nurse level loads. Were you getting paid like a nurse?
So that is the $1 million question, No, no, we weren't. And that was one of the motivating factors for me to even go to nursing school was the pay gap. And I got to give it to my director who used to always say, if if you're not happy and you want to make a change, then, do what you got to do, right? Just keeping it the way, keeping it fresh here. And I gotta respect that. And I appreciated his push on that. But yeah, the pay was not there, unfortunately. I did, obviously, I think we all want to always be paid more. However, I do
Absolutely.
look at the market that I was in. Was it fair? Probably, comparatively to the other paramedics when they were what they were making and stuff like that. And also, I had the hospital incentives, right? Like the night shift differentials, the weekends, things like that. So I do feel like I was paid decently as a medic.
Right. I guess I was thinking more like you're taking four patients and doing a lot of the work that a nurse does, but you're not getting paid the same.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the driving factors for sure. And you're absolutely right. Like we were doing nurses work and not getting paid, and it's still a gripe today, even as we talk right now. But unfortunately, it's just I guess that's the way it goes. I don't know.
Doesn't make it right. It's just the way it is sometimes.
That's it exactly.
You're not quite as old as me, but you were probably older than a lot of the nursing students that you were in classes with. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely a good mixture comparatively to what I thought it was going to be. We
Okay.
definitely had a few people that were even older than me, but I felt like I was on the higher end of the age spectrum.
Yeah, I was 38 when I started nursing school. I was 41 when I graduated. I'm almost 51 now. I was given the nickname of Papa Cope. And I can't tell you how many times people are like, "Oh, you're like my dad's age." And you're just like, "Oh, my heart." Like, why would you say that?
Yeah,
So,
we had a girl who turned 21 during her clinical, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's right. I'm with people that can go administer narcotics but cannot go have a beer." you know?
well, yeah, when you put it like that, it's a little weird sometimes.
Yeah, but again, like those age differences, it made a really unique cohort. I'll say it like that.
So let's talk about documentation, like pre-hospital documentation versus documenting as a nurse. What has been like the biggest difference or the biggest surprise when it comes to documenting on the pre-hospital and in-hospital side?
So pre-hospital documentation, you generally have what's called a PCR, a patient care run report, or something to that effect, and it kind of flows with all your click boxes and stuff like that, and then you end it with your narrative. And a lot of companies will allow you to freely write what you need to write to paint a good picture. Some are a little bit more strict on that, but either way, you're writing that. For me, it was like kind of chronologically what happened, and that was it. It was one patient, one experience, and one and done. Right. When you get into the hospital and you're managing a patient anywhere from a couple of hours to 12 hours, your entire shift, and that continuous documentation, that those hourly reminders that you have to put in those vital signs, and hey, go, I went and saw the patient. I checked in on him, absolutely. But did I say that I did that? Because as we know, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
That's right.
So for me, I I struggle with that as well, for sure. That was another big learning curve, especially when we went from being a tech, so to speak, into an actual nursing role. That was the big moment and the big jump, because before it was like I would document an EKG, an IV, a couple meds. That was pretty much it. Now it's like you're responsible for that entire patient assessment, the medications, the med rec, and like everything to go along with it. And that continuous documentation, that still is a struggle. But as time goes by, I'm definitely building some confidence and getting better about it.
Now, I would assume with the paramedic background and as many years experience that you have pre-hospital, and then transitioning to a paramedic in the hospital, I would have to say that your paramedic experience was a huge asset when you were in nursing school. But were there any instances where you thought, "Oh, this is not the same at all. This is not helpful," or "I need to change my way of thinking"?
Yeah, so I think the big difference between being a paramedic and a nurse, and I think this will help answer that question, is being a medic, you're really focused on that acute care, right? That's what our education is really based upon. It's skills heavy, acute care, emergency medicine. When you go through nursing school, you go over everything from the preventative to the acute, subacute to long term. There's every component that they want you to learn. So I think that understanding that you're no longer in just an emergency setting, that was a big eye opener for me. And I knew that was coming, and I appreciated that difference, but I don't think I really fully took that in until I was going through the process.
Going to the hospital experience, did your nurse colleagues find that your skills as a paramedic were particularly useful in the emergency department? Did they utilize those to the maximum?
Yeah, absolutely. I found that we were in my ER, we were really appreciated in there because, we were the experts for the IVs. Like, let's be honest, a paramedic can get an IV on just about anybody. That's one skill that, we will hold our hats to that one. But, when it comes to the management of those high acute patients, like that's our bread and butter, right? Those respiratory patients, those cardiac patients, even kiddos, like all those things, like I'd like to think that we really excel in those moments, because that's just what we focus so heavily on in the pre-hospital setting. So when those patients came in, I felt like we were utilized and then some.
Now, I have done EMS off and on since 2004. I got my EMT basic and never did go for my paramedic. And for me, one of the reasons for that is one, we have a family, and that would be time away. I do it on a volunteer basis, so there's no financial incentive for me. And I think one of the things that frustrates me, and every state's a little bit different. I know like Pennsylvania has a pre-hospital RN program, but one of the things that frustrates me here in the state of Virginia is there is no path or avenue for me to challenge or take any type of like advanced paramedic, like RN to paramedic. They do have RN to paramedic programs. They're like a full year long. They're going to make me learn how to do IVs. They're going to make me learn how to do a lot of stuff, like all the pharmacology, a lot of which I already know, working in level one trauma center and ERs for the last 8 years. One of the things that frustrates me is that there's not a path for that. And I always, whenever I mention that, I always get pushback from paramedics about that. Well, there's not a path for us to do like a advanced like pathway to RN, and we do a lot of the same things. I'm sure you've come across that conflict between the paramedics and the RNs, one wanting to go to one and one wanting to go to the other. How do you reconcile that? And like, what have you seen work? It sounds like you guys have a pretty good relationship between the paramedics and RNs, but what has been your experience with that conflict?
So I'm glad you brought that up. For me, for a long time, I wanted to potentially bridge over, and I had looked on the online programs, and there are very few out there. And if you read enough posts about it, there's just a lot of headaches associated to those other programs. During COVID, I decided, you know what? Either way, I'm going to do A&P, and I'm going to start plugging away at some of these classes while I'm sitting around, doing nothing like the rest of us.
Mhm.
And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. And from there, all of a sudden in New Hampshire, my local college, one of the technical schools, created that had a paramedic program, had a nursing program, had an LPN to RN, had no medic to RN program. And then
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden, they created one.
Excellent.
Yeah, so they had a medic to RN bridge, and it encompassed 13 months of education. Right, it was basically they kind of knocked off like a little bit over a half of a semester for us. However, the clinical aspect was definitely cut way down as well. With that being said, I still had to jump through a lot of hoops. Like we had a day of clinical where I was demonstrating how to wash my hands, you know? Right.
I
So
remember that station.
Yes, sir. So, we had a lot of those same moments and those same feelings of like, why the hell am I here right now? Like I could be teaching this class. Unfortunately, that was what we needed to do to satisfy the boards and to be able to say, we have met the requirements to go sit and take our NCLEX. And that also required us to do all the prereqs that everybody has to do. Like I said, the A&P, the micro, the human growth, like all those nursing classes and stuff. Now, with that all being said, do I think that there should be a clearer path? 100%. Yes, I do. I feel as though, yes, there is a lot of areas that are different and a lot of additional education. But I feel like the base foundation of a medic and what you need to do to become an RN, there's still a very big gap that I really truly believe could be, shrunk up quite a bit. And I think that would really encourage a lot of paramedics to bridge over. Now, with that being said, it's also a degree program, so you have to meet certain requirements. So I can appreciate why it's the way it is to a degree from my own ignorance, I guess. But it is frustrating. Now, to kind of answer your question on the contrast side of that, like the RN to the medic, I think coming out of nursing school, you're not prepared to be a paramedic yet, right?
No, I
I feel
agree.
yeah. And I don't think anybody really feels that way.
No, no,
And
no.
there's a huge difference between those two worlds, of course. But do I think with your nursing education and background, you can't take a bridge program to, kind of fill those more acute care void? Then yes, absolutely. I think that should be a thing. And it's funny that you mentioned the RN exempts and stuff like that, or however you worded it, because that's the term that's in my head now. I sat down with a young lady yesterday who has RN exempt out of Idaho, and their nurses are able to actually work as paramedics. They basically get some additional education. They do like the airway stuff, things like that, and they're able to function as a medic. So I think that it's getting there, but it's everybody does things so differently right now. And there's
Right.
no standard approach. And I think if we could standardize an approach and really come up with a curriculum to go both ways, I really think that would just benefit the healthcare community all around.
Quick break from the conversation. If you're enjoying Beyond the Call Light, please don't forget to follow the show wherever you listen. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Amazon Music. Hit that follow or subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, a quick rating or review really helps others find the show. Speaking of which, let's get back to it. Pennsylvania has a pre-hospital RN program. In Florida, if you're a registered nurse, dentist, MP, PA, whatever, you can submit to the board and challenge to take the National Registry exam. And once you take that, then that is transferable. That's accepted anywhere in the country. I feel like there's got to be a more uniform path to allow. We are clearly lacking in pre-hospital care. Like, agencies are shutting down. We're losing medics because a lot of medics are going into nursing or, burned out. And so I feel like if you have nurses, like I run on a volunteer basis, and in the state of Virginia, I can practice to my full scope as a nurse in an ambulance, but only if it is an interfacility transport for a critically ill patient. Like, say we need to transport a patient. The ALS crew is like, nope, that is beyond our scope. We are not doing that. I don't feel comfortable. You need to send a nurse. I will get on the back, and then I will be the AIC until we get to the hospital, the receiving hospital. And I feel like, well, if I can practice in my full scope for that, what's the difference between practicing for full scope in an EMS setting? Because you're still going to have to meet all of the local agency standards. You're still going to have to go through the orientation process. You're still going to have to demonstrate proficiency. But I think the difference is every agency's vetting process is different. There's no uniformity. So like ours is like 3 to 6 month orientation. Others might be like, hey, 1 month, you're good to go. You're AIC, have fun. And so I just feel like we need to come up with something. There are people out there that are willing to do the work. And I'm not asking, like, I don't want to intubate people. And that's a red dot skill in our state. Like, that is not every paramedic. We have paramedics and critical care paramedics. Paramedics just do eye gels. Critical care paramedics can do endotracheal tube intubation. So anyway, it's one of those, I did a post on that like 6 months ago, and oh my gosh, like people were like on both sides, just irate. Like paramedics were like, just go to school, just become a paramedic. I'm like, okay, it's all right. It's good. So I'm kind of at that point where I'm happy just being just a ambulance driver. I'll just be the basic, and I'll chauffeur people around. I'll let the young bucks handle all the fun stuff. So anyway, I digress.
Well, I think you make a really solid point there. I mean, absolutely. Like, we take nurses, before I was a nurse, I would take a nurse with me on a critical care patient, right? Like that. So you're 100% correct. Like, there's no reason that especially an emergency room nurse. Now, I think if you're like, my wife is a nurse care manager, she has no patient contact whatsoever. So do I think she should be able to go and challenge the paramedic exam? No, no, I don't. And she would be right there with me on that, right?
Right.
However, do I think someone in the emergency room who has that background that can show proficiency should either maybe not be able to challenge the medic exam, but like you said, maybe we have a different certification that says, hey, if you have your RN, you've met this requirement and you've showed competency, yes, absolutely, come work pre-hospitally, because there's absolutely a void. And again, we're just trying to do what's right for our community, our patient, all that. So if you have somebody that's willing and educated, why would we not? I'm right there with you.
Well, good. I'm glad somebody's on my side. Not too many of them are, but I appreciate that. I want to transition into, we've talked a lot about working in pre-hospital, critical care, and along with that, there comes with what I call an emotional weight. And we can talk about mental health, whatever, but I feel like there's an emotional weight that, and oftentimes can manifest into like a physical weight, like that physical weight on your shoulders, that heaviness that you carry. I have talked at length with my mental health struggles 20 plus years ago. And I know you've mentioned it in your podcast, like the burnout and some mental health aspects of it. Let's transition to that. Let's talk about the mental health aspect of it and how you have dealt with it over the years and where you're at today.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Sounds good.
Long before I got into EMS, I dealt with mental health struggles. And I'm a Gen Xer, so emotions were not high on my upbringing. It wasn't my parents are bad parents. They're not bad parents. It was just a different generation upbringing. And as a result of that, I think there was definitely some repressed emotions. And therapy, when I was like in my mid-20s, saved me. And it was a nurse practitioner who literally saved my life. I was suicidal, and it was a nurse practitioner who I still keep in touch with today, like 25 years later, who literally saved my life. And not the reason I became a nurse, but definitely something I gave thought to. Like, if I can help other people avoid that, then that's what I want to do. And if nursing is one of those ways, and I have certainly had the opportunity to talk with patients like, that come in who are having suicidal thoughts, and I can kind of help navigate that process for them. Everybody's encounter is different. I never know exactly what that patient is going through, and I never ever tell them that. And whenever I orient new nurses, I always say, don't ever tell a patient you know exactly how they feel, because you don't. Because everybody's different. They may have a similar situation, but how they feel is completely unique, and it will be for every single person. So I have found my personal experience useful in helping my patients over the last decade. Have you had the same experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Suicide unfortunately does kind of hit home for me as well. Don't really want to get too into that one because then I'll get all choked up.
Same.
Uh,
Barely got through that, man.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, when I have a patient come in that really is in a bad state of mind for one reason or another, I truly do my best to just take everything else that's around me, all the noises, everything, and just really give them my attention. I want them to know that I may not be able to fix your problem right now, but in this moment while we're talking, I'm going to do everything I can to help you. And I think having some personalized experiences with trauma and loss and all these things, and even my own personal struggles, I think we all have them, right? I don't care who you are. We all have our own baggage to some degree or another, and how you let that define you is really what is important. And I've learned from my own battles. I've learned from my own mistakes, and believe me, I was also at rock bottom. I can't say, and fortunately I was not in a suicidal state, but I was pretty damn depressed, and I realized where I was going wrong in life, and fortunately I was able to make that 180 as well. And I'm living a very healthy life now. I'm very happy. I couldn't be in a better place. I truly couldn't. But with all of that, I'm able to really, I think, connect with my patients just on that extra level that makes them just feel okay to be there. And I think them coming into the ER, especially in any one of those psychiatric states, whether it be suicidal, depressed, anxious, any of the above, that alone takes something, So using my own experiences and being able to just provide that extra little bit of care, it definitely goes a long ways. It makes me feel, much better about how I'm able to help these patients. And I truly feel like I do a good job in just making their day suck just a little bit less.
We just trying to make their day a little bit better. And one of the things I try to remember is that when they come to us, it's usually one of the worst days of their life. And
Hmm.
our job is to try to make it a little less awful. Let's talk about how we manage the emotional weight of our jobs. And how have you learned to mitigate that stress and avoid falling down that, like when you feel yourself slipping into that depression? How do you manage that? Do you recognize the signs? And if so, how do you help prevent that slide from happening?
Yeah, I think when you have a high stress job like this, you have to be able to decompress one way or the other. And I gotta say, like my family is everything to me, and I've said it plenty of times on my TikTok stuff. I preach it. It's like, and when I say like my wife, my kids, like they're my everything. And when I'm having a bad day, like if I can just come home, see their faces, and even if they're driving me crazy, that is still my own personal just paradise because. I grew up as an only child up until I was 12 years old, and my kid brother was born. And I I was in a single home, a single family household, stuff like that. And I didn't really have that big family thing. So to me, I don't know, that's like really what I find to be my stress reliever. Even like I said, even though when they drive me crazy sometimes, just getting to hang out with them, But then on the flip side, like I still have my personal things that I enjoy doing. I've really enjoyed kind of making this content and stuff like that. That's a newfound hobby. I go through these swings. I find hobbies, you know. I think the ADHD in me, like I'll go down the rabbit hole of something, you know, and then a couple months later, I'm like, all right, what's next? You know, so having hobbies but you know, my family is where it's at.
I love to hear that. I'm the same way. I've got three beautiful children. One's fully grown and out doing adult things, and then we've got two younger ones. And like you said, like when I come home and like if I've had a rough day, like just getting a hug from them, like that's better for me than like any pill I could take. Now, is there a place for those? Absolutely. But for me, that's my happy place. That's my stabilizing environment. So, because like they're still at that age where it doesn't matter what kind of day you've had, they're happy to see you. And I'm going to just soak that up as long as I can.
Yeah, and I'll
Oh, no,
agree
go
to
ahead.
that. I was gonna say I'll agree to that slightly. Sometimes my teenager, you know, has his days where he's just like, "Don't talk to me," and I'm like, I just wanted to say, "Hey, how are you, buddy?" You know, but the little ones are still very much in that dad, you know, and
Yes,
when you hear that, I'll tell you, it's rewarding.
it is very much so. Yep. And that's what I look forward to coming home to every time. So now let's talk about before you learn how to manage that. If you could go back and talk to yourself 20 years ago, or like whenever you started your career, like what is one bit of advice? You got like 2 minutes to talk to yourself. What advice would you give?
If I could just go back and say at least one thing, I think it would be slow down. You don't need to learn everything overnight. You're not going to learn everything overnight. And this is a journey. And as you gain more experience, that confidence will come with it. Because when I first started, you know, I second guessed myself on everything. I constantly would just beat myself up after every call that I feel like didn't go well, and that wasn't healthy, you know. And I really struggled with that for a long time. When I first started, I was around some really good people that really knew their stuff, and I felt very behind the curve, you know. So I would go back and say, hey, it's okay, you know, you're going to learn, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to grow from every one of those. And as long as you continue to add one more file into that Rolodex each time you have an experience, in due time, that's going to grow and you're going to be just like the colleagues that you're looking up to. So it's okay. Pump the brakes.
Excellent advice. All right. So now we're going to go back to the future. I've heard you mention on your live streams that you're considering getting away from the critical care aspect of things. And you've mentioned that nursing has so many opportunities. Like if you get burned out in one, there's something else. So what's next for you?
That's a tough question. And part of why I'm doing, you know, this social media thing is to really get to know what other nursing jobs there are. You know, like again, all I know is emergency medicine. And in the little bit of experience that I got from nursing school, and as you know, it's like med surge heavy. You're gonna go do an L&D rotation, couple days in psych, and that's really it. Like there was a few extra little sprinkles in there, but there are so many opportunities to find work as a nurse. I really don't know yet. I will say I definitely have an interest in the PACU. I think that has my attention, right? It's you still get some of that subacute medicine. You sometimes have that acute medicine. It's not the chaos of the emergency room, but you get to really focus in on you know, 1 to 2 patients. Again, this is all speaking from my ignorance. I really don't know, but I think this is what it's like. You know, you get to take that focus and kind of bring it back into the smaller patient world, kind of similar to ICU, but it's not the longer term care like the ICU is. And I'm trying to really narrow down the parts of my job that I currently love, and then figure out the ones that I don't particularly care for as much, you know.
Right.
And I'm leaning towards the PACU. I think it's got my attention anyways. You know, I would like to learn more about it, and yeah, we'll see what the future brings. That's the beauty of it. You never know. You never
That's
know.
right. So I did PACU call when I worked at a community hospital, which is great. ER nurses, ICU nurses could do PACU calls. So whenever they got, you know, a surgical patient that came in and they had to call in the surgery team, they would call in us to come in and recover that patient post-op. And I didn't do it a whole lot, but I did it enough to know that like some of the things that they say coming out are hilarious. Like just the conversations they're trying to have with you, like it really does. It takes all you can just not to laugh at some of the things they say because it is. It's just it's kind of hilarious because they're definitely not all there, but they think they're all there. So, and I having come out of PACU a couple times, I know that I've woken up to some smiling faces, like just kind of like chuckling at me. So, I think you would enjoy it. I think, like you said, I think for all the reasons as you mentioned, you still get a little bit of that critical care, sometimes that super acute care if they're not coming out the way they're supposed to, but you're not in that just fight or flight, constant chaos mode. So we talk about giving yourself advice, going back in time. Let's talk about paramedics who are considering a similar path to you. Now, I know everybody's path is a little bit different and the options that are available to them are different in terms of bridge programs. But generally speaking, if you have a paramedic who has been at it for a while and is thinking about becoming an RN, what's your advice to them?
My advice is to do it, right? We all know that eventually you're going to probably burn out. Like, you don't meet too many paramedics that have been in this game for 15, 20 years that are like, I love coming to work every day still. Like, it's a rare find, right? I call it a unicorn because that's what it is. So I would say just do it, right? It's going to be challenging because you're going to have to go back to school. And the thought of that is daunting. And I'll be the first to admit it. It was. But once you get into it, it's just like medic school where you just go week to week, you grind it out, and then before you know it, like you're done. And that's truly, truly how I felt. I would strongly recommend getting all your prereqs done. That I cannot stress enough. And then the other mountain for me was the T's exam. You know, one thing about me is I'm a high school dropout. That's for a whole different day. So let's just say I struggled, man. I was a late bloomer, right? And so going to nursing school after, especially being out of medic school for so long, it was a challenge, right? I had to go back and like relearn algebra and geometry and like all these basic high school things that like I just never really learned in a level that I needed to have to get into nursing school, right? Like I'm talking English, like the reading comprehension, all of it. Like the science was the one thing I had in my corner, and that's the one that a lot of people struggle with. So I felt good about that, but I really had to put the work in for that. And I used the T's Mometrics book, and that I just put like solid 3 months in.
Holy
Every single,
smokes.
yeah. Oh, I wasn't playing around. I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And I need to prove to myself that I can pass this exam, because if I can't pass this, what makes me think I can get through nursing school? So at my age, I was like, dude, just grind it out, man. And every day, every single day for 3 months, I would put time into that book, and I went in, and I went in with such confidence, and I crushed that exam. And let me tell you, when you put the work into something and then you accomplish it, the sky's the limit. Like I was like, oh, we're good. We are totally good. Let's go. And I signed up like, as fast as I could. So, I put the work in, but the reward is so worth it. I can't tell you how happy I am finally making that jump and going through with it. So just do it.
If you ever do a podcast on that story, on your journey, because that's an incredible story from high school dropout to paramedic to registered nurse, like, and to where you are in life right now, that is an absolutely incredible story. You should go on a lecture circuit and go talk to kids at school, especially in high school. But man, that's an amazing story. All right, my friend.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
This is the surprise question. You're the first one that's going to get
Boy.
this. You're the first recording. It's
Oh, boy.
nothing heavy. It's okay.
All right. Let's go.
But I'm going to end every podcast interview with the guest with this question. And that question is, if you had to stop being a nurse and a paramedic, what you're doing right now, and you had to change to a completely different career, what would it be?
That is a very good question. There's the dream of being like a rock star, because I used to play, in bands and stuff like that. So that's always been in the back of my head. Man, if I had to just go and uproot everything, I think I would be a pilot. I think I would want to get my pilot license. Yeah, when I was younger, I always had this ambition to be, a fighter pilot and all that, and that's obviously long gone. But the ability to operate an aircraft in that manner, and just getting that ability to experience it. I don't know. I think just off the cuff, bam, right now, like that's the first one that would come to mind. I think a pilot.
That's awesome. All right. Also, if you could just let people know where they can find you, what your podcast is, and where they can find you on socials.
Yeah, sure. So I do the podcast Last Known Vitals. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify. We're not up to Apple yet. We're not quite there. We're working on it. And then my TikTok account, I have the Paramedic to RN. You can just search that. It's pretty searchable at this point. And I have the same one for the Instagram. So Paramedic to RN and Last Known Vitals.
Outstanding. John, thank you so much for coming on to the very first recording of Beyond the Call Light. I'm not sure when this will air. I'm not sure if it'll be the very first episode, but you are the very first guest. And for that, I am eternally grateful for being the guinea pig and also for sharing your insight and knowledge into getting this thing up and running, because that was instrumental for me in launching this podcast. So thank you very much.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine, Gary. I'm really excited for you and your podcast, and I can't wait to see, when you start throwing these out every single week, man. It's going to be exciting to watch.
Every single week. Oh, man.
But I'm holding you to it. I'm holding you to it. You got this, man. No, we'll see. I'm excited for you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining us on this episode of Beyond the Call Light. My name is Gary. I'm an ER nurse, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Call Light with Gary Cope. Don't forget to clock out.